Alrighty, hey, good afternoon, folks. Thank you for sticking with me for the end of the past summit. So I know you two guys. Are you guys first timers?
Yes, my first one.
Oh, fantastic. Just so I get a good idea on the audience, what is your area within the data
Data engineer.
engineering? Same. Okay, so we will be going into some more of the infrastructure Azure side because we'll be talking about migrations, but I'll try to guide you guys through it. Cool. Okay, so we are here to talk about migrating the Synapse dedicated SQL pool across tenant boundaries, which was a very interesting project that proved to be quite troublesome, so I figured it would make a good topic. So this is a little bit about myself, Brigitte Kula. I am the principal architect at Nordic Global. We're a healthcare IT consulting firm based out of the United States, working primarily or exclusively in the healthcare field with hospitals, providers, and payers and things like that. Very heavy in the Epic space, but we do a lot of work now in overall enterprise IT, digital modernization, things like that. A lot of that really just means all things cloud. So moving hospital organizations into the cloud from the data platform, but also the enterprise IT side. I've been in the data community for close to 20 years now. Doing a lot of data warehousing work, data architecture work, a lot of ETL stuff, building the traditional Kimball methodology data warehouses to just little data marts, Power BI dashboards, things like that. But then also on the infrastructure side, very heavily in the in the Azure infrastructure, really getting the core foundation of it up and running. So today I'll start us out with what the background of this project really was. When I say tenant across tenant boundaries, do you guys have a good understanding of what that is? Sure. So you can think of it almost like the company boundary. Within Azure, there are Azure subscriptions. Well, there are resource groups where people usually put their key vaults, Azure SQL databases, and things like that, which is just a logical container. Then on top of it, there's a thing called subscriptions, which is typically a way to just bucket everything for like one department into one area, easier for billing and things like that. There's other thought processes behind it. But then at the top level is the tenant. And that is, so like Microsoft's examples, right? That would be your Contoso organization. So typically, or all the resources you have would be under that tenant. More specifically, it would be your Azure AD domain. So when you're logging in as Brigitte at Microsoft.com, that has a tenant that you're associated to, and then all the resources are under that umbrella. So in this one, what we were doing is an Azure to Azure migration. The background for it is irrelevant for today's presentation, but we were basically, they had a really robust data platform that they wanted to move into a completely brand new, net new tenant. So this was around, approximately 5 petabytes of data or so. Typical data platform things that you could think about: ETL processes, right? Lots of Azure Data Factories. They have obviously the Synapse workspace. They also had Databricks, a collection of just Azure SQL databases, a few hundred virtual machines and Kubernetes. All of that. It was the overall data platform. The Kubernetes was supporting some special AI workloads. So this is all the stuff that we wanted to migrate into the new Azure AD tenant. So essentially, the easiest way to think about it is essentially moving it from one company to another. So almost, creating another entity. So that's what this project was about. At a high level, this is what the architecture diagram looks like. Let me just get my... All right, this will be easier. So just to make the story better here, right? So we have the orange box. This is the existing tenant, so the entire enterprise infrastructure, everything is in this space. Not just your data platform, but everything else that the organization is running. Then on the right-hand side, this is the brand new tenant that we would have stood up. And by that also means a brand new Azure AD directory. So what is important there is the user John, for example, right? That person would be logging in with john@companyaa.com. All the Exchange Online, your OneDrive, all that stuff is there, just like business as usual. And then now he'll have another completely separate identity as well, especially if he has chosen to be part of this organization. So that will be john@companyb.com. The tenant-to-tenant connectivity, obviously we are moving lots of resources from A to B. So there was tenant-to-tenant connectivity that was set up. This is from a networking level. So it's all inside Azure, so that makes it a lot easier, right? If you think about traditional cloud workloads, you're moving a lot of data from on-prem to cloud. You've got express routes or some kind of VPN connection or whatever. This piece of it makes it a little easier because it's all in the internal backbone of Azure, so we're able to move 5 petabytes of data without too much sweat. The approach, so this orange circle, this is just a simplification, but just imagine this as a collection of all that other stuff that I talked about earlier, so the 5 petabytes. There's like a dozen ADFs, a handful of Databricks workspaces, a few Synapse things. So all that stuff we wanted to migrate into the green circle. So the virtual machines, for example, those are re-provisioned through IAC, so like through Terraform and things like that. Databases, that one is fairly easy, a simple backup restore process, and just move the physical file itself from A to B and get it stood back up. That was pretty straightforward. And then AZ copy, is there anybody not familiar with what AZ copy is? It is a command line utility used for storage account to storage account copying. Think of it almost like a file syncing process, but it's really not an active syncing process. In traditional on-prem worlds, you may have heard of a thing called robocopy. So you're just saying, folder A, folder B, and it'll just suck everything up and move it over to the other side. So that was really useful. Again, 5 petabytes of data in traditional data platform worlds. You can imagine, how many Parquet files, how many CSVs and things like that would have been in a traditional data lake kind of a strategy where you have your staging folders and your process folders and things like that. So all of that was primarily done through that. Databricks has its own process, but all of that was fairly straightforward. The sticking point was Synapse. So that's what we're here to talk about, all the fun we had with it. Yeah?
Yeah, so I do have a question. So, like the ADLS storage account in orange, you have ADLS storage account in green. Like you did have to use AZ copy to go like file by file and move everything? Or like, how were you using AZ copy there?
Yeah, sure. So for the recording rights, so the question is really how was AZ copy being utilized to do the file copies? Are we doing the 50,000 copies one by one? So no, AZ copy, so this is out of the box, it's a Microsoft provided utility. It is very versatile. But you are able to you're able to do individuals, but you can have it do recursive. So you can essentially go at the top container level in Azure storage account, or wherever, right? You could go at somewhere in the tree, somewhere in there, but you can have it do recursive A to B copy. It is also versatile because it does some basic checksum things. It gives you a pretty useful output after it's done, so you have a good idea of, did you miss anything or anything like that. I will say it was surprisingly very reliable. I had used it in the past, but nothing at this scale. I can confidently say we had zero problems with it. We had a couple times where we had to restart it. That you'll get weird timeout issues or things like that, so that's okay. But yeah, it was pretty straightforward. It does support some kind of a syncing process also. I've never used it, but it looked like the documentation was suggesting it supports something like that. Okay, and yes, please do feel free to just shout out questions. I do like it to be more interactive, so thanks for that. Yeah. Permissions, for like a person like myself. Yeah, so you're asking questions about permissions. Are you specifically asking like, I as an outsider, if I had elevated permissions to do these kinds of things, or when the files moved over, is the security the latter, right? Yeah. That's a really good question. AZ copy does not take care of that, especially because you're also moving tenants, right? So there might be an AD group X that has read access on this folder. Well, that group doesn't exist on the target side, all that kind of stuff. So AZ copy just moved the bits over, and then we had to do the permissions as well. And that was a separate PowerShell scripting process to essentially, at a high level, iterate through everything, extract all the, what's the word I'm looking for, the ACLs at the ADLS, right? So groups, whatever permission level, extract that, and then on the target side, just reapply it. And then also behind the scenes for that, to make things easier, all the AD groups that are part of this platform, we created the exact same AD groups on the target side, so we don't have to do any kind of crosswalk or anything like that. And so essentially, we just have to iterate through. The groups at this point didn't have any humans in it, but the permissions were set up. Yeah, really good question. Okay, so I will go into Synapse. I wanted to spend a little bit of time just doing a little bit of review on this, because Microsoft loves to confuse people with all of its product names. Synapse means many, many different things to many, many different people. Are you guys familiar with this MPP data warehouse system that they have? Yes, okay. So it is a data warehouse product, right? So from here, it was originally an on-prem appliance. MPP meaning massively parallel processing. So it's still a SQL Server, right? It just supports really large data warehouse workloads. So initially, they came out with what was called PDW, Parallel Data Warehouse. And then, again, Microsoft Form, they just changed the name for no reason. It was only like 4 or 5 years into it. So then it used to be called APS, Analytics Platform System. And then after that, it essentially, enter the era of cloud. So then it used to be called Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which in my opinion made a lot more sense than what it's called now. And then eventually when Synapse came out a number of years ago, as you all know, Synapse is a collection of already existing things like Azure Data Factory, and in this case, the Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which got renamed to Dedicated SQL Pools. So for the rest of this, I'm going to just call it Synapse DW because it makes sense. But that's what we're talking about is Dedicated SQL Pool. So it is the exact same technology. This is also important to know because later on, when we go into how the migration actually works, I'll talk about some of the hacking we have to do to make this work. But this technology, the Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and the thing that's in here is exactly the same. The only difference from an end user is from the connection string. You would be, in the old ones, it would be your resource name .sql.database.net. You're connecting to that. Versus in this one, it would be the resource name .azuresynapse.net. So that would be the only difference, but the engine, the technology, and all that stuff is the same. Okay. So I will go into challenges of this thing. Yeah. So this would be the easiest way to do it. Any kind of database migration, right? The simplest way is just do a backup restore. In the traditional on-prem worlds, I know my friend over here works in the on-prem world, so it's great. You get a singular huge .bak file and you copy it over and you're done. Unfortunately, with this platform, that's just not the case. Going back to this stuff, right? When it was in this space over here, the APS, that concept still existed. There was a .bak file that you could work with and move it to the next rack over, simple plug and play kind of stuff. But unfortunately in this one, that's just not there. So we had to think about other ways to do that. If you're familiar with the Azure SQL databases, that has a similar, it also doesn't have a backup restore, but it has the export capabilities, which is the backpack. Anybody not familiar with backpacks? So it is extracting all of the data and the schema, and it essentially puts it in a backpack. So the file itself is called .bacpac, but it is your entire schema and the actual data itself, and it's a containerized way to then move databases from A to B, including the permissions, because as you may know, right, that permissions are stored in the master DB, like those kinds of things. All that comes along with it. So it's pretty great. Unfortunately, not an option for Synapse. That concept doesn't exist. We do also have to keep in mind that it is, the target for these are really massive data warehouses, right? You're working in fact tables of many billions and billions of rows, to the point at which point it actually makes sense to use a Synapse data warehouse instead of just a normal SQL server with optimized fact and dimension tables. The other fun thing was this journey that we are going upon. It didn't look like the use case really came up. There really weren't any documentation out there or any best practices or guidelines with this. We worked very heavily with Microsoft Teams on it as well, and we were kind of spinning around for that. So those are the standard challenges, I would say. The next two is unique to this customer. So the extra challenge that came up with this was a concept of double encryption. If you're familiar with TDE, total data encryption, on SQL Server, so the same concept again exists in the Synapse world, where you have the full encryption. on top of that, you are able to bring in your own encryption key to encrypt that data with. It's called double encryption because Azure, at the platform level, all of that stuff is automatically encrypted anyway. You can choose to turn on TDE, which uses just the Azure base encryption to do that. And so the whole concept of double encryption is then you're encrypting it literally on top of that with your own special key, right? Obviously, there's a security component for it. So in this case, this was just one of those features that it sounds good, so of course we're going to turn it on. So that feature was enabled, which proved to be more challenging. And that's something I'm going to be able to demo here today. And then the last piece, especially you guys are data engineers, you might be wondering, it sounds like a lot of stuff. The other approach is ETL, which would make sense, and honestly, that was the first thought process for this. The total number of tables in this was only around 7,000 tables, so not anything too insane. The actual database size was around 60 gigabytes or something. So it wasn't anything enormous for this part of the larger platform. But unfortunately, the way the tables were built, it was not conducive to the ETL type stuff. Synapse, going back to what it is, right? It's an MPP system, so your tables, for example, are distributed across 60 compute nodes. So you have to build the tables properly to take advantage of the distribution or set it up for replication. And if it's not set up properly, then trying to put that table back together in order to do this extract proves to be very bad performance. So we just, like, getting that out reliably without disrupting day-to-day operations was proving to be just impossible. Essentially, we wanted to do this during the off hours where no other ETL jobs are running. So yeah, we weren't able to make that work. So that is crossed off. I guess before I get to this part, we tried many different ways. This is a large enterprise customer, so they have, they have support agreements with Microsoft. So we were working quite a bit to try to find some pathway, and luckily we were able to find this post from the Azure Tech community itself, showing new capabilities, and even then, new limited support capabilities to move the Synapse DW across subscription boundaries. And so that was the idea that we kind of homed in on that, because if we can make it work across subscriptions, we should be able to make it work across tenants. So I'll show you a little bit of how that stuff works out. But that was basically our approach, is use this process, a bunch of PowerShell scripts I'll show you, or I should say Azure CLI commands to get the database and restore it into the other side. It is still similar to the traditional backup restore process. In the Synapse world, it's called a restore point. So within the data warehouse, you would say take a restore, create a new restore point. It only takes a couple minutes or so. It seems to suggest it's basically like some kind of a snapshot. So you're taking a snapshot, and then you're working with that. But once we take a restore point, for simplicity purposes, we'll just call it a backup. So once you initiate the restore point, then I can go and do a restore utilizing that restore point, so utilizing that backup. Now the challenge was to cross all the different boundaries, to cross the subscription boundary, the tenant boundary, and then again, an extra uniqueness in this case, we also changed regions. We went from East US to East US 2. So just piling it all on top of each other. So I want to show little bits of what that looks like. Okay, actually this one, I'll talk about this one first. So in order to do this, right, we are moving tenant boundaries. I guess a quick question on that. B2B accounts or guest accounts, do you guys understand what that is on Azure AD? Great. So I can use my identity, my one identity across both tenants. So that was a necessity because essentially this process I'm going to execute, I need to exist on both sides. And I need to have permissions on both sides to be able to do this type of operation. So it is elevated permissions. The other important thing in here is definitely to have Microsoft on standby. And so this really comes into just the uniqueness of being in the cloud space. As you all know, one of the many benefits is you're eliminating a lot of the administrative overhead. You don't have to manage and maintain the actual servers, do the security patching and all that stuff. But also, you are giving up control, right? There are many things that are obfuscated or just restricted away from you as a user. And so when you're doing really advanced things like this, that proves to be a challenge. So the one thing we were running into through this process is when the restore process was working, it would essentially just get stuck in a hung state. And for this kind of an operation, there weren't many telemetrics that we could go off of to get an idea of what is actually going on. Even with all kinds of logs turned on within log analytics and things like that, you would expect to see something. So all you would be seeing is just in Azure portal, the status would just be restoring ... and that's it. And due to the size of this, it took anywhere, once we got all the processes working, it took anywhere from 4 to like 6, 7, 8 hours. But with all the access and capabilities we have on the customer side of things, the only thing we can see is that when the process is running, it just says restoring. So we don't know where it is, if it's running into any kind of permission issues or anything like that. And so that's where I say having Microsoft support on standby proved to be really, really helpful because they, from the back end, are able to then obviously see a lot more stuff. They're able to engage the Synapse engineering team, who's able to then actually get into the infrastructure from the back end. We had a handful of times where it did get stuck, and there was no, the typical IT answer, it just got stuck, let's just do it again kind of thing. But at least we were getting some kind of direction instead of just waiting for the processes. And so with this one, we're working with our account rep saying, hey, we had a lot of collaboration going on before I would execute anything, send them a ping saying I'm about to execute it. There's job IDs and those GUID IDs and things like that. So you just pass that stuff on and then they're able to monitor it. And if, as I mentioned, it took anywhere between 4 to 7 hours. So that part was also inconsistent. Because again, this is a cloud platform. There are things that are metered, right? So there's other activity going on in the platform. That is also another thing that's just business as usual. So for example, after we got to 5-hour mark, I would have to reach out to them just via messages saying, hey, check status on it. Is it stuck or is it still actually doing its thing? So there was a lot of babysitting to make that work. Okay, so let me show think I have this stuff stood up. What I'm going to do is first show you how that B2B stuff is set up. As I mentioned, we need to exist on both sides. So I have two completely separate Azure accounts. This one, for example, is called Akula Labs. Domain is akula.cc. I do not get any email on it, so do not spam me, Jake. So here is Akula Labs, and then in the other tenant, it's just another, just a Paygo account that was created. So this one is brigitte@akula@gmail.onmicrosoft.com. So these are completely two tenants, completely separate from each other. So if I go back to Akula Labs, you guys are able to see this fairly well, right? And this is my guest account. As you can see, this is from there, allowing me to log in to this tenant. And then I've given it already all the permissions. We won't get into that part in this one, but I've given it all of the elevated permissions, the global admin, and then especially at the subscription level, the elevated permissions needed to be able to do this kind of activity. So then if I go over to the other one where I am logged in as this other identity who has its own Azure account. So I'm going to flip over. So this is where you're able to then see that this one person exists on in both tenants. So I can click switch over here to flip me over into the Akula Labs tenant in that space. So here you can see it's called Akula Labs. Now, because the permissions and things like that are set up, I'm able, I have everything. I'm able to get around and do whatever I need. So we have the Synapse workspace. We have a Azure SQL Server, which is the logical container that typically houses your Azure SQL DBs. It also is the same thing that can house your Azure SQL DW, the Azure SQL Data Warehouse. This is important because in our process, at a high level, what's going to happen is we're going to take a restore point from the source. Then we're not able to take it directly from there and do a restore into the Synapse on the target place because this is the part where the features don't support it perfectly. But what we're able to do is take the backup from the source, and we would have to restore it into this temporary place into the Azure SQL Server. So it acts like an Azure SQL DW, which again, as I stated earlier, right, it is the exact same product. There's no performance issues or anything like that. Like technically, we could leave it at that and then call it done. The only difference is from a user experience, they would be used to having the SQL pool there in the Synapse Studio and things like that. So that would be the only thing that's missing. Outside of that, all the functionality is the same. So that's what, so this is created for just that, is to temporarily house it onto this. And then we would do another backup restore, at which point I can restore it into the Synapse workspace itself, because this is, in the same subscription. It's basically next to each other, and I'm able to get it fully to the target.
So like this here is like the secret sauce to being able to cross tenant.
Yes. This plus the encryption is another hurdle. Yeah. So I was, and really I wanted to bring up, do more of this whiteboarding stuff because it is, trying to show this in demos, I realized it wasn't getting there. So, yes. So we've got tenant. Actually, let's just say source. DW, and then this is inside a subscription. And so that's basically it. We're able to take this data warehouse, do the backup. Once the backup is done, then it goes into here temporarily, and you're performing a restore. So all of those operations, as I was saying, was 4 to 6 hours or so. So let's just say 5 hours. So this piece, takes 5 hours. And then once it's inside the same subscription and the same tenant, then we're able to do another restore point on this from this temporary location and then move it into Synapse and finally get it into its resting spot. But that, again, is another 5 hours-ish or so.
So that's another thing. So like that thing, that process, like the 5-hour process, that is like supported and documented by Microsoft or not really?
Yes and no. The command lines, the CLI lines, the command line arguments that we're calling are supported stuff. So we are calling, for example, like new Azure Synapse Restore Point. Like those are legitimate command lines. It's I guess I would say like this middle ground stuff is undocumented. And I can, that's where the blog post I found proved to be really helpful because in the blog post, that was one of the things, and that's what's interesting. I would say it's quasi-approved, right? Because it is a Microsoft person saying, this is how you can do it. This is how you can move it across subscription boundaries. And so I just took that. I'm like, well, there's no reason it wouldn't work across tenant boundaries. I just have to make sure, that I exist on all sides and have all the permissions I need to do this. So that's where, and part of the guidance that was in his article is that revelation that Synapse Workspace isn't able to support this kind of a restore, but the SQL Server hosting area is able to support it. So you just use that temporarily as a landing zone. So I do want to take a bit of time to just show at least what some of these arguments looks like, and I'll have the script posted so you guys can take a look at it, including the link of the source document that really helped through here. So we have, as you can see, these are source and destination things. So I've got my source tenant ID, the source subscription ID. And then the details of the Synapse Workspace itself. So you've got the Synapse Workspace name on the source side, what the name of the database is, right? So that's EDW. So I'll show that. No restart. So this one, the workspace name, right? This is the workspace name. And here in the SQL pools, this is my dedicated SQL pool. So, and then as I was, like this stuff you guys are already familiar with, right? But it's the workspace name .sql.azuresynapse.net. So this was the part that I was saying earlier. The only noticeable difference if we just decided to just end it here, the only noticeable difference would have been that fully qualified domain name of the database. That would be the only thing. Okay, so that's what brings it over there. Let me flip back to here. So then we've got the destination tenant IDs and the destination subscription IDs and all that kind of information. So within PowerShell itself, you're able to utilize the connect AZ count, and more importantly, set AZ context. That is essentially doing this operation that you've seen me do as I'm flip-flopping, right? It's moving me between the tenants to do my operations. And obviously, again, this is why having that guest account is really crucial. I know I keep saying it all the time, but it took a long time even to get those kinds of permissions and things like that set up, because you're traversing all these different boundaries and it causes concern to IT leaders usually. So this switching stuff that I'm doing here is basically this, right? Connecting to the account and then setting the context. So if I do this just one line at a time, what am I connecting to? Source? Okay, so I'm logged in to my source tenant and setting the context for that. Now, so this is the, to your question, right? These are the Microsoft CLIs that are used for that. So there's a CLI there called AZ Synapse SQL Pool Restore Point. And so this is what creates the backup. And then let me show that from, I'm in the default, okay. So from the GUI, if I make my way into the database itself, it's this thing here. So this part you don't have to do it through the script, obviously. So you could come here to create a restore point, give it a name, hit apply, and that will fire off a backup event, right? A restore, create a new restore point. And that usually takes anywhere between 5 seconds to like a minute or so. So we'll do this. Okay, well, while that's running, this is where the demos are not really conducive for this one because these operations do take some time. This will take a couple minutes. I will shift over to talk about encryption because that was another larger hurdle out of this. It's odd because it's usually a few seconds. Okay. So I have another version. This one doesn't have any of the encryption stuff. So if I go to TDE, that's disabled on here. It doesn't, and then on top of that, the workspace doesn't have the double encryption turned on. But if I show another one, wait. SQL pools. There. Okay, so this database is encrypted. It has TDE turned on, and then I had SSMS running. Using one, again, using some of these DMVs, you're able to get more status. Of course, and the main thing I want to show is this. Encryption state is encrypted. And then if you're wondering why there's so many, this goes back to their 60 compute nodes. So all of these are in there. So that was the next obstacle in here. From encryption at the basic level, as we all understand, encryption keys, you've got a private key and a public key. You are locking the database, right? You're encrypting the database, and the key is needed to do any read-write operations to the database itself. So if I show the key vault and go to keys, there's an encryption key in here. Is there anybody not familiar with the Azure Key Vault and the encryption stuff in there? Okay, so the important thing to note, almost everybody, the typical way people utilize this is by utilizing the Key Vault, you can just generate it, takes a second, the key is there, and now all the services that are utilizing the key again would have to have the appropriate permissions. So the database engine needs to be able to have access to the keys. Your ADF pipelines, all those processes obviously need access to the keys. Any of those operations are needed to obviously use the database. So now, as you can imagine, because the database is encrypted, if I'm doing the move, the key has to exist in the other place as well. And so that is the next big challenge out of this, is that the key is not movable across tenant boundaries. So there is, going back to here, so now if I put in a key vault in here, any of the keys inside the subscription and the tenant, they're able to move around. They're able to move around within the tenant itself. So you can move this key into another subscription if I had some without any issues. But as soon as I want to move it across the tenant, then I have a problem. It just does not support that. The Azure Key Vault, if you've played around with it, it does give you the capability to export or extract the key. So this demo key, for example, I can just come in here. Again, you have to have the permissions to do this, but I can download the key and then import it back into another key vault. And that's typically the easiest way if I want to move it from here. So if I want to move it from here to here, that would be the mechanism, right? Again, scripting, you can do it through scripting, but this is what is happening. Once you download the file, then go to the other key vault. In this case, I didn't bother creating one, but I can just show you the import process. Wait, that's not. There we go. Restore from backup, and then oh, great. Well, normally you can do that. We won't go into troubleshooting that. So the tenant boundaries exist. As you can imagine, that is by design, right? You don't want your encryption keys to essentially get out of your company, right? Because that really is what your tenant boundary is. You don't want that to be able to leaked out of your organization. So this piece is actually part of the official Microsoft documentation. It's a little over the top, but the only way you're able to do this is if you move the entire subscription across tenant boundaries. So this. So I'm able to lift and shift the entire subscription. Going back to earlier on, we were saying, right, there's resources that are put inside resource groups are put inside subscriptions, and then the subscription is inside a tenant. So at the subscription level, the second highest level, I can pick that up and move it to, or I guess, sorry, the other way, right? I can pick that up and move it across tenants. Again, you have to have the permissions to do that. I'll show you that piece here. We just won't see it complete. It takes like half an hour. There's some more cleanup work that you have to do if you're moving the subscription, but it's doable. So but you may also be wondering, well, why didn't we just do that from day one? Because that does kind of sound like an easy button. If I have this data platform, right? I've got the subscription with the 5 petabytes of data and all these other things. I could just pick up this box and move it into here, which is definitely a valid way to do it. But enterprise IT, as you can imagine, that is very disruptive, right? While we're doing this migration, day-to-day operations needs to run. So there's there was this was overall a little over a year-long engagement. But as things were being stood up in the new environment, there's a lot of processes that are still running in parallel and things like that, and you finally cut over. So that easy button was not available to us, as you can imagine. So with this with this approach too, that's why it's like a really over-the-top approach, but it's the only way I can have the key exist on both sides. Because also at this point in time, I'm going to have the databases on both sides. I'm doing an initial copy to make sure it works, set up the permissions and everything like that. And then during cutover, do my final cutover and cut people over into the new stuff. So the encryption key, similar to myself and my identity, the encryption key needs to exist on both sides. And so the pathway for that is by using this export-import method that I was demoing, but errored out. Let's just try it one more time. Or maybe I'll do another export. You know, yeah, that one is not being used. Yeah, that's a good, I bet that's what it is.
Yeah, delete the one you want to restore.
So demo 5. Okay. Oh wait, I didn't give it a name. Oh, it uses the same name, yeah. You were correct. I've never restored it into the same key vault, but yes, that should do it. There is, let's purge. Okay, we'll give it one more try. There we go. So that export and import, or really export and restore process, that works. And so essentially for this, in order to make this work, in order to make my Synapse DW backup and restore work, I need the key to exist there first. I have all my services stood up, so I have my Synapse workspace created. It just doesn't have the dedicated SQL pool in there. I'll need to get the key over to the other side and get all the permissions for that stitched up. So as you can kind of imagine, basically the approach for this then was we had a completely net new subscription created, really to just serve this process. Which again sounds over the top, but the subscriptions are just as easy as resource groups. So like creating a subscription only takes a couple minutes or so. That is an even more elevated task. So we had to, obviously work with the folks that had the highest level permissions for this organization. Once they created the subscription and then granted me owner, then I was able to make this work. So you create the subscription, you create another key vault, get everything set up, which is really just creating the key vault. And then what you saw me just do is the export and then import into here.
I'm missing something. How does that work? So but the key was originally in the source, right?
Yeah. I guess I was doing it on the wrong side, but yes.
So you have to move. I thought you have to move that subscription.
Yeah. So key KV, and then.
Oh.
I was just doing it on the.
Oh,
Yeah, I was just doing it on the wrong side.
And then you move that subscription.
Yeah. So then.
All right.
Let's just call it KV temp. So in this case then, this doesn't exist right now. So once this is set up, right, get a brand new subscription created, create a key vault in that subscription, and then just do a simple export import that I just showed. Like that works. moving it across subscription boundaries, but inside the tenant. Once that is all set up, then I can just pick this up and bring it over here, which I think I have one extra subscription on standby to do this with. Yes, so this one, because this one has the stuff right now. So I am in my source, and so here is how I will do change directory. Now, because I exist on both worlds, this is where Azure is iterating through. It'll give you all the things that you exist in. So especially in your organization, if you have access to a subscription, if you see this and click on the drop-down menu, you may see a handful of ones that you have guest presence in, right? So I'll select Akula Labs, and that's it. I don't want to hit it right now, but actually, it doesn't matter. This one doesn't have anything. Yeah, do that. It is deceiving because this message, right, makes it look like it's done. It does, this is a pretty dramatic change you're doing. So as you can imagine, from a platform side, it needs, I'm just calling it my own undocumented terms for this, right? It needs some reassimilation time. I don't really know what the time window there is, but when we did this, basically I let it sit for at least half a day or so before I came back for my next set of operations. So now let me go to and in Akula there's Azure subscription 1. And this is where it's still settling everything up. So eventually you'll be able to get in there. See, I'm logged in as the super admin on the Akula Lab side. It's still, rejiggering itself, let's just say. So that was that. And the SQL Server workaround, right? That was the secret sauce to make this work. Is I needed to have the encryption key on both sides. Let's go back to VS Code. Yeah, okay. This typically only takes 10 seconds or so. So I don't know if the response is just being slow. But if we take a look at let me make this bigger. Yeah, this is the, wait, no. This is what I want to show. Because I have a few, okay. There we go. So these are the restore points or backups, right? So if you saw it, I'd called it past demo 04. And so this restore point is then what I would use everywhere else. The piece to make it work is through the resource ID, right? The resource ID is the unique, fully qualified name of the actual resource, right? So everything in Azure, they all have resource IDs. So here, if you can see, right, it's subscription ID, resource group, then the name of the resource group, providers. And so this is where some of the hackery comes in, is we then have to change this from Microsoft.synapse to Microsoft.SQL Server. And in SQL Server, it's not workspaces, it would be server name, and then the name of the logical SQL server, and instead of SQL pools, right, it would be database, and then the name of the database. So that's how you hack around it to make it work, to make this restore point work into here, into this temporary location, and then you can finally move it into here. Now, we've got a few minutes. A couple other interesting things in here was that, okay, so the database is encrypted. So you may ask yourself, well, why not just unencrypt the database and get rid of the key and move it? And perhaps there is still an answer for this, but I was never able to find this out. So there is that option. You can turn off TDE. That also takes a long time, as you can imagine, right? Especially with data, it has to go through everything and unencrypt everything. And so I had spent a good number of days on this process because this was at least at that time, I thought it was a good theory to test out because logically it makes sense. Just decrypt it and we can move it. But what was interesting is that the key, even though it's decrypted, and then through one of the DBCC commands, like DBCC drop encryption key, even through that, the key still existed somewhere in the database. And that is the piece where we were at a loss. I spent quite a bit of time with a number of folks from the product team, and there was really no clear answer. So what would happen is I was using this DMV to basically follow this, like throughout the day, slowly each line would change from encrypted to decrypting to not encrypted. But in the final state is it would say not encrypted, but the thumbprint remained. And there seemed to be no way to remove that entirely. There are many different theories, including one theory that they suggested to wait 60 days because there's log retention for 60 days, and it should flush its way out. That didn't work out.
You waited the 60 days to see if that.
Well, so I through the exciting journey, I think I had like 9 or 10 different iterations of this. So I was very curious about that. So towards the end, I went back. I'm like, it's been quite some time. Let me go check if it still exists and it's there somewhere. So that proved to be. I mean, that was a hill that we just could not move.
And so if that would have worked, would that organization been okay with that process?
Yes, so we did get the clearance, and so back to the earlier point, I don't think there was much review done on if it was truly needed or not, the double encryption. It just it's there, so of the thought process is, well, of course I want more protection, which in this case proved to be problematic. But yes, if that would have worked, we wouldn't have to do the key vault moving around. The other piece, well, I guess I'll just move on to the lessons learned. Lessons learned in this is, one, we definitely need Microsoft's involvement, right? You are letting go of some control when you move to these platform as a service offerings. And I'm a huge proponent of it. I love the PaaS offerings it has. But when you're trying to do these kinds of things, that's where you just, this would be the thing where I wish I could just go into the Windows box and just take it out myself, or even just copy it onto a disk and put it into the destination, right? That you just can't do that. And so some of those behind the scenes telemetrics is only available to the support engineers. So you have to keep them involved through this process. And they were great. They were absolutely great to work with once you got the correct team assembled for this operation. The other big challenge is, and this is also typical for these cloud services in general, not just Azure, but in general, is because you're utilizing multiple different services. And so to my comment of assembling the correct team within Microsoft, it was multiple issues, right? One issue was the actual moving of the database, right? Of the actual database from A to B. Then the other piece was the encryption. And so we needed to get the Key Vault team plugged into this as well, which took a long time. And from the support engineer side, right, they're very much in their lane, so they know the product in and out. But once you're beyond the boundary of the SQL product, the rest of the Azure services, which it takes multiple services to make this work. Like Synapse itself, you need a storage account, you need a Key Vault, you obviously need the database. And so you need all these different components to make it work. And navigating through that and troubleshooting through those different technological layers can be challenging, but definitely need Microsoft on board. The other piece is with encryption. The Key Vaults do support utilizing external or third-party encryption. So you don't have to use so coming into the Key Vault, if I go to generate, and this is the typical way, but you can do import, which means that you have an external product that is generating RSA keys for you, right? Going back to basics of encryption keys, the public, private, all that stuff, right? So you can generate it somewhere else and then import it into here, which I think that was the biggest lesson learned out of this process, even within the organization itself, is because the Azure generated key, as you saw, is not movable, and even it definitely locks you into the platform entirely. Unintended, I understand why the key is not movable due to security reasons, but it has this issue. So that was a bigger lesson learned out of here is to perhaps consider utilizing encryption key from a third-party service, and then use that across all your platforms, across AWS and Azure and GCP and whatever. But yeah. So that's pretty much it. Once we got the Key Vault there, we were able to get the restore done, and Bob's your uncle. Yeah. Any questions?
What was the use case for?
Yeah, that was so it was basically they decided to carve out the analytics group into its own, moving towards into its own entity. They're still part of the organization, but it was shifting more and more and more to allow them to be very independent. Prior to us getting engaged, they were running into limitations of things they wanted to implement in their space due to other technical debt that already exists. There's security features they wanted to enable, but that would cause issues with all the other enterprise IT workloads. So they essentially just wanted to carve out their own area. There's other challenges with that. You're traversing between the two Azure AD. There's licensing implications. Goes beyond the scope of this, but you need two of everything essentially. including firewalls, right? So now we've got a brand new area. So they had to double up on firewall appliances on the Azure side.
So when all this stuff is done, do you compare it to the existing production system, which is that initial 5 hour?
Yes, because it was double, because I had to do the double hop. So at the end of the day, the cutover, the impact was non-existent while all of this was happening, but the cutover window was basically over a weekend. So the Synapse data warehouse, especially, that was identified as more crucial because, as you can imagine, all these ETL pipelines are running. You want to get that done before everything else. So that piece was basically done, within overnight processes. So very little impact, except for the user experience, because they all had to log in a different way. So that was the only issue. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sticking all the way through the end. Yeah.